In the zodiacs of the Theban type, the ecliptic is not divided into segments using zodiacal constellation drawings, but rather into 36 equal parts. Each constellation is thus divided into 3 segments. This theory is confirmed well by the long zodiac of Dendera. Morozov pointed out that each of the zodiacal figures encountered there is accompanied by 2 additional symbols, those of young women with stars over their heads, all of them resembling each other. There are 24 of them in the long zodiac of Dendera altogether. They add up to 36 figures together with the 12 figures of the zodiacal constellations, and thus divide the entire zodiacal stripe, which has the shape of a ring, into 36 parts. Morozov wrote the following in this respect.
Each of the constellations accompanied by a pair of maidens. Together with the 12 zodiacal figures, they stand for 36.5 10-day periods.
Morozov is referring to 36.5 10-day periods that a 365-day year comprises, since the division of a zodiacal belt into 36 parts can also be interpreted as the division of a year into segments of roughly 10 days. It takes the Sun a year to pass through the entire zodiac. The half-day discrepancy between this so-called stellar year and the 365-day year is of no importance to us whatsoever. The 10-day periods shall refer to the 10-degree arc segments. When Morozov tried to determine which female figures belong to which zodiacal constellations, he made a few errors. Let us delve into this issue once again and try to understand whether the female figures in the long zodiac of Dendera really complement the 12 constellational figures to make 36. Firstly, there must be 24 of these maidens. Secondly, their distribution across the zodiac should give 12 triads together with the constellational figures. Each triad has to contain 2 female figures and 1 constellational figure. The figures from different triads should not mingle with each other. This is indeed the case. Moreover, there is only one way to divide the figures of the maidens and constellations into 12 such triads. Numbers are written beneath the strips of the long zodiac. Their sequence in every constellation is indicated as 1, 2, 3, and there are 12 such sequences altogether. The numbers directly under the actual zodiacal figures are circled. Thus, in each triad of numbers corresponding to a single constellation, 1 number is circled. The other 2, uncircled numbers appear beneath the 10-degree maidens. The enumeration depends on the direction of the numbers, which is indicated by the arrow sign underneath Leo, towards the general precession of the figures. The reverse direction requires all the figures of 1 and 3 to swap their respective positions. Bearing this in mind, the 10-degree segment enumeration is absolutely unequivocal. For the meantime, the enumeration in question clarifies the issue of the maiden with a rod, which she rested on the back of Capricorn, as well as the young woman in a transparent dress that follows her across the hands of Newt in the next strip of the zodiac, which Morozov calls naked, following the erroneous illustration from Bade's uranography. Morozov considered only the first of the female figures with a rod to be a symbol of a 10-degree segment, and not the second, which has no rod. Now we can be certain that this is a Morozov's error. In order to prove the fact that Morozov made an error, let us assume that he was correct and include the woman with a rod in the group of 10-degree segment symbols, excluding the figure in a transparent dress from said group. It turns out that one can find no satisfactory means of dividing the 10-degree segments into triads, since one of the triads is bound to have no constellation symbols whatsoever, whereas another will have 2. It is easily demonstrated. One has to go through all possible versions. The only possible solution for the distribution of the 10-degree segments over the long zodiac and their division into constellational triads is shown in this image. The fact that we found 10-degree segments in the long zodiac might give us hope that the positions of planets in it are a great deal more precise than usual. This would have been the case had the planetary symbols inside a given constellation been positioned between its 10-degree segments, which would make the planetary locations 3 times more precise. However, this hope is false. The Egyptian author of the long zodiac places all the planetary symbols except for the Sun and the Moon in the intervals between the 10-degree segment triads. We find no other planet of the primary horoscope inside any triad whatsoever. Had we found any, we could attempt to estimate the planet's position in a given constellation with more precision. This doesn't happen to be the case with the long zodiac. All it takes is a careful study of how the planetary figures with rods are positioned. The only ones we find inside triads are either standing in boats, or have their rods lean against other symbols, like the young woman near Capricorn. As we shall see later, all such figures pertain to secondary horoscopes, and their positions indeed correlate to their positions inside constellations. The most important conclusions is the fact that the division of the zodiacal belt into 36 parts that we see in some of the Egyptian zodiacs is the very same division into zodiacal constellations, each of the latter being represented by a sequence of 3 segments. One could theoretically allow for another possibility, namely, that the ecliptic is simply divided into 36 equal parts, with no accounting for the zodiacal constellations, since the latter do not equal each other in the direction of the ecliptic. Therefore, the marks used for such uniform division of the zodiacal belt would a priori be shifted in relation to the constellation boundaries. Furthermore, one would be confronted with the problem of estimating the initial reference point of such uniform division, seeing as how it isn't affixed to any boundary between constellations. This would gravely complicate the decipherment of such zodiacs. However, if we are to consider the long zodiac of Dendera, the division of the ecliptic into 36 segments in the zodiacs of the Theban type is most likely to conform to the same principle as the regular Egyptian zodiacs, being just another way of dividing the ecliptic into zodiacal constellations. This is a collection of various Egyptian astronomical symbols. A study of the drawing might lead us to the useful observation, which is confirmed by every known Egyptian zodiac. It concerns the differences between the male and the female figures. This question happens to be important enough. The quality and condition of the artwork found on the ancient zodiacs are often far from perfect. One often has doubts about the gender identity of one figure or another. This issue may be vital for the decipherment of the horoscope in general. It is easy to notice that the male and female figures differ from each other drastically. The distinctive characteristic is the width of their steps, which is a lot greater in case of male figures. This law of Egyptian symbolism is followed in every zodiac without exception. This is a method we shall use often. The only case when this method cannot be applied is when the figure is drawn with both feet seen as one when viewed sideways. There are a few such figures in Egyptian zodiacs. Fortunately, they don't stand for planets as a rule, and their sex is therefore of secondary importance for the purposes of astronomical dating. As early as the 19th century, the first European researchers of the Egyptian zodiacs discovered that the planetary figures on them usually look like wayfarers carrying rods which are topped in a special way, usually T-shaped, visibly leaning forward. These planetary rods, as we shall be referring to them hereafter, can be seen held by planetary figures in most of the Egyptian zodiacs. The rod was a symbol of movement and being on a journey in the Middle Ages, being the obvious accessory of a traveler. Let us recall that planets were considered to be wandering stars in old astronomy, wayfarers, in other words. Ancient astronomers used to consider planets mobile stars. The Sun and the Moon also ranked as stars in ancient astronomy. One usually finds more figures with rods in Egyptian zodiacs than it is required for all the planets one can see with the naked eye, of which there are 5, apart from the Sun and the Moon. Nevertheless, in the long zodiac of Dendera we find 10 such figures, for instance, the number equaling 9 for the round zodiac, etc. The matter was addressed earlier. It turns out that there isn't just one horoscope, but several of those at once. The only complete horoscope is usually the main one, which stands for the actual date that the horoscope in question was compiled. Other horoscopes are secondary and incomplete. Therefore, one finds more planetary figures than one expects in the Egyptian zodiacs. Let us formulate the principle for decoding planetary symbols in the Egyptian zodiacs, as used by the new Chronology project. Each and every figure that carries a planetary rod in an Egyptian zodiac stands for a planet, regardless of whether the figure in question is standing, sitting or walking. Alternatively, they can be participants of planetary processions, which once again means that they accompany one planet or the other. Later we shall discuss the issue of telling the main horoscope's planets apart from those from the secondary horoscopes. However, if the rod carried by a figure is a mere stick with no special topping, the figure in question may well be a non-planetary one. We usually see these unorthodox rods carried by secondary horoscope figures, likewise the symbols that accompany a planet as its entourage. Their symbolism varies to a greater extent and isn't quite as strict as that used for the planets of the primary horoscope. There are Egyptian zodiacs where planets are represented differently, not as wayfarers. This isn't a frequent occurrence. In the Athribis zodiacs, for instance, all the planets except for the Sun, the Moon and Mercury are drawn as birds. In the zodiacs from the tomb of Padasiris, the planets look like waist-long portraits whose hands are out of sight altogether. The identification of planets on the zodiac is one of the key moments of astronomical dating. One is occasionally faced with several identification options for one or the other zodiacal figure. The correct one is discovered as a result of astronomical calculations. Let us explain the procedure of such calculations. Let's assume that a given zodiac allows for several options of identifying one planet or another. In the first stage, we shall consider all the astronomical solutions resulting from various planet identifications to be of equal validity, and then verify each one's correspondence to the secondary horoscopes of the zodiac in question. It turns out that random solutions don't withhold such tests, excepting the very brief and minimally informative zodiacs, and there are few of these. We shall witness the fact that the Egyptian astronomers and artists applied enough effort to exclude random or extraneous solutions from the zodiacs they created. As a rule, there is only one solution that satisfies to the entire symbolic content of an Egyptian zodiac. After we do away with the extraneous solutions, we can return to the issue of veracious planetary identification. Bear in mind that each of the solutions that we arrived at during the first stage would be based on a decipherment of its own. However, once the correct solution emerges, the correct planetary identification method can also be indicated. This will be the identification method that brings us to the correct astronomical solution. Thus, let us sum up. The final solution of the issue concerning the respective identity of the figures in the zodiac under study, and the planets that they represent, can only be reached after all of the zodiac's decipherment options undergo exhaustive calculations and are tested to comply with the secondary horoscopes. The final option is the one that yields an astronomical solution satisfying to all the parameters. There is usually just one such solution, which removes the ambiguity from the issue of planetary identification. In accordance with the above, the planetary figures in the zodiacs can be divided in two parts. The first part is the Egyptian planetary images, which can be deciphered instantly, even before beginning any astronomical calculations. Most of such cases were already discovered and studied in detail by predecessors of the new chronology. The circle that contains the zodiac where the figure in question comes from, shall look normal. The second group consists of the planetary figures that cannot be given a final identification during preliminary analysis. There are usually few such figures, just one or two per zodiac. However, even a single planet can significantly alter the result of the astronomical dating. In this case, the zodiac circle shall be shaded gray. The situation when a single planet could be represented by several figures simultaneously isn't an uncommon occurrence in the analysis of Egyptian zodiacs. In such cases, the authors go through all possible versions and perform astronomical calculations for each and every one of them. The final identifications of planets only emerge at the very end of the research.